"Why is there a place laid for you in my kitchen?" the Duke of Deverill asked. The woman at the scrubbed table put down her bread and stood up so fast that the bench went over behind her. It was 20 minutes past 10 at night. Above their heads, through 2 floors of stone, Crispin could hear his aunt's dinner party still going. 19 people, 4 courses, and the good candles. "Your Grace," she said, "you were not expected until Thursday." The roads were dry. He came further in. The kitchen staff had all shot to their feet as well, and were doing that thing servants do when they wish very much to be furniture. "You are Miss Fell." "Yes, Your Grace." "You are my mother's cousin's daughter, and you have lived in this house since last February." Crispin looked at the table. 1 plate, a piece of cheese, half a loaf, small beer, at the corner nearest the scullery door, with a candle end that had been burnt down to the tin. "Is this where you take your dinner?" Susanna Fell stood very straight in a gray gown that had been turned at least twice, and looked him in the face. "It is where I take all my meals, Your Grace," she said. "It is quiet, and the fire is good, and Mrs. Denny is kind to me." Behind her, the cook's mouth flattened into a line. "For 11 months. 14. By whose direction?" "I would rather not say." "Miss Fell," said Crispin, "I have been 3 years in Naples and Trieste unpicking my father's affairs, and I came home tonight expecting nothing more taxing than a cold supper. Do not oblige me to send for the housekeeper at 10:30 and ask her instead, because she will tell me, and then it will have been got out of a servant instead of out of you, and I do not think you want that." The candle end guttered. "Lady Sowerby's direction," Susanna said. "Her ladyship's view is that as I am here on the family's charity and have no fortune and no connection anybody has heard of, it would embarrass her guests to sit down with me, and embarrass me more, and that a woman in my position is happier not being made an exhibition of." She said it evenly, as though reciting a lesson she had long since stopped arguing with. She was not unkind about it, Your Grace. She said it in front of only 2 people. Crispin stood in his own kitchen, and became aware of a sensation he had not had since he was 19 years old, which was a strong wish to break something. "Sit down and finish your bread," he said. "I am going upstairs." He did not go upstairs. He went to the steward's room, lit 2 lamps, and sent for the housekeeper, the butler, and the cook, and kept them until 1 in the morning. And by 1 in the morning he had a fair copy in his own hand of what 14 months at Deverill Chase had actually consisted of. Miss Susanna Fell, aged 24, orphan, arrived February the previous year at the invitation of Lady Sowerby, his father's sister, who had been mistress of the Chase throughout Crispin's absence. She had come, according to the letter of invitation, as a companion. What she was in fact was the entire working machinery of the house. She kept the household books, because Lady Sowerby could not add. She wrote all the letters, ordered all the stores, dealt with the tenants' wives, nursed the second footman through a quinsy, taught the 2 under-housemaids their letters, sat up with old Mr. Rowe the steward when his eyes failed, and read him the rentals aloud, so that he need not admit he could no longer see them. In 14 months she had had no wages, on the grounds that she was family, no dress allowance, on the grounds that she went nowhere, and no place at the table. "She has 1 afternoon," said the housekeeper. "Sunday, she walks to the churchyard and sits." "Whose grave?" "Nobody's, Your Grace. There's no one of hers buried in this county. She sits on the wall." Crispin dismissed them, and sat alone in the steward's room until 2. He was 37. He had spent 3 years in southern port towns going through his late father's papers with a clerk and a bad temper, discovering by degrees that the 7th Duke of Deverill had been a charming, plausible, catastrophic man who had signed anything put in front of him. The estate was solvent now. It had been very far from solvent in the year Crispin was 26, and how it had been got over that year was one of perhaps 4 things in the whole tangle that Crispin had never satisfactorily accounted for. There was a gap. There had always been a gap. £9,000 had come into the Deverill accounts in the October of that year from no source that any ledger named, and the crisis had passed, and nobody had ever spoken of it again. And when Crispin, at 27, had asked his father directly, the 7th Duke had laughed and said that a gentleman's affairs were his own, and that the boy had a shopkeeper's mind. At 2 in the morning, in a room smelling of lamp oil, Crispin unlocked the deed box that had come home with him from Trieste, and began going through the private papers he had been putting off for 11 weeks. He found it at 20 minutes to 4. It was a single sheet, folded small, in his father's unmistakable slapdash hand, and it was not a bond and not a note of hand, and would not have been worth a farthing in any court in England, which was doubtless why it had been kept where nobody would look for it. Received of my friend those. Fell of Ludcote, £9,000, being the whole of what he has in the world, on my word alone and on no security, he refusing all security and refusing all interest, saying only that I must send for him if I am ever in such a case again. I am ashamed of this paper and shall not show it to my lawyers. If I do not live to repay it, whoever comes after me must, and must do it handsomely, and must remember that there was one man in England who did not ask me for a signature. Crispin sat with that piece of paper in his hand for a long time. Thomas Fell of Ludcote had died 4 years later. Crispin sent, at 6 o'clock in the morning, for every person in the house who might know anything, and by noon he had the rest of it out of his own steward. That Fell had been a Bristol sugar broker of no family and enormous credit, that he had lost the greater part of his fortune in the failure of the Lowther Bank in the year of his death, that his widow had died within the 12-month, and that his one daughter had been passed for 6 years between 2 sets of relations who had found her a great expense. And in February of last year, Lady Sowerby had written to that daughter and invited her to Deverill Chase, on the family's charity, as a companion. Did my aunt know, Crispin said, about the 9,000? Her ladyship was in this house in the October of that year, your grace, said old Roe, whose eyes had failed but whose memory had not. She was in the room when the money came. She said at the time it was a mercy and a vulgar sort of mercy, and asked whether the man might be got to take a picture instead of gratitude. Crispin gave orders for a dinner on the Friday. 22 covers, the same 19 people and 3 more, the plate out, the long table, the good candles. He told nobody anything. On the Friday evening, Miss Fell was intercepted in the passage on her way to the kitchen by the butler, who informed her that she was expected in the drawing-room, and that a gown had been sent up to her room from Marbury that afternoon, ordered by his grace, and that the housekeeper was waiting to do her hair, and that his grace had said she was not to argue with Mrs. Denny, as nobody had ever won. She came down 11 minutes late in dark blue silk, with her mother's small pearl cross at her throat, and a look on her face that Crispin recognized, having worn it himself in Trieste, the look of someone who has decided to endure whatever this turns out to be. The drawing-room went silent. Miss Fell, Crispin said, and gave her his arm. You will sit at my right hand. Crispin, said Lady Sowerby. Aunt, that is my place. It has been your place for 3 years, and I am extremely grateful to you, said the Duke of Deverill. And tonight it is Miss Fell's, and tomorrow we shall discuss the Dower House. They went in. It was, For the first 2 courses, the most uncomfortable dinner Crispin had ever presided over, and he did not care in the least. Susanna Fell answered when she was spoken to, which was seldom, and ate almost nothing. And once, when a Mrs. Vane asked her loudly across the table whether she found the chase very grand after what she had been used to, replied that she found it very cold in the north passages, and that his grace ought to have the chimneys looked at, which made the steward laugh into his wine. At the end of the 2nd course, Crispin stood up. "You will forgive me," he said. "I have a paper to read, and it is not long." He took out his father's letter and read it, word for word, to 22 people. The £9,000, the whole of what he has in the world, on my word alone and on no security, he refusing all security and refusing all interest. Whoever comes after me must repay it, and must do it handsomely, and must remember that there was one man in England who did not ask me for a signature. Then he folded it. "Thomas Fell of Ludcote," Crispin said, "saved this house in the October of the year 1800, and the year my father nearly lost it. There was no bond. There was no interest. Nobody in this room, including his own daughter, has ever heard his name spoken at this table. 4 years later Mr. Fell was ruined by the failure of a bank and died, and his daughter was passed round her relations for 6 years like a bill nobody wished to accept. 14 months ago she was brought to this house as an object of charity. She has since kept the household books, written the letters, nursed the footmen, taught the housemaids their letters, and read the rentals allowed to my steward every Tuesday for a year because his sight is going, and he had not the courage to tell me. She has been paid nothing. And she has eaten every one of her meals for 14 months at the corner of the kitchen table by the scullery door, with a candle end, because it was thought that her presence in this room would embarrass the company. Somebody's glass went over. Nobody picked it up. I have been 3 years in Naples going through my father's affairs," Crispin said, "and I have found a great deal to be ashamed of, and this is the only thing I have found that I am ashamed of on my own account, because it happened in my own house while my back was turned. So let it be said plainly at this table once, and then not again. The family of Deverill has been living for 11 years on Thomas Fell's £9,000, and has repaid it with a bench in the kitchen. Whatever else any of you say of Miss Fell hereafter, you will not say charity. There is no one at this table with less claim on charity from me, and there is no one at it, myself included, who has behaved half so well." Then he sat down and asked, in an ordinary voice, for the fish. Lady Sowerby left on the Monday. She went in her own carriage with a great many boxes and a settled income that was rather more generous than she deserved, having been offered the choice between the Dower House and her sister's establishment at Bath, and choosing Bath, which surprised nobody. Crispin repaid the money in the 3rd week. £9,000 and 11 years' interest at 5, computed by his own attorney, the whole put into the funds in Susanna Fell's sole name with 2 trustees of her choosing, so that nobody living, himself first among them, should ever be able to touch a farthing of it. She fought him about it for 4 days. She said it was her father's gift and not a loan, and that he had refused interest, and that she would not take money out of the estate her father had wanted saved. "Then give it away," Crispin said. "Found a school. Buy a hospital. Keep it under your bed. It is yours, and the reason it must be yours and not mine is that I intend, in about a month, to ask you something, and I will not have that question asked across a debt. Do you understand me? I want you to be able to say no to me and walk out of this house tomorrow with £9,000 and never think of any of us again." Susanna Fell looked at him across the steward's room table, where she had been arguing with him for 4 days and had begun, somewhere around the 2nd, to enjoy it. "That is an appalling way to conduct a courtship," she said. It is the only way. I know how to conduct one honestly. How long is a month? 31 days, said Crispin. In the month I have in mind, and I shall count them. He counted them. She signed the trust deed and chose her own trustees, being the vicar and Mr. Rowe the steward. She moved out of the north passages into the south rooms, ordered the chimneys swept, and began to be seen at dinner every evening. And she went on doing every single thing she had been doing before, only now with wages she was extremely rude about, and a proper desk, and the rentals read aloud to Mr. Rowe on Tuesdays with the door open. On the 31st day, the Duke of Deverill found her in the churchyard on a Sunday afternoon, sitting on the wall. "There is nobody of yours buried here," he said. "No, there is nobody of mine buried anywhere I can reach. He is at Ludcote and she is at Bristol, and I had no money to go to either." Susanna moved along the wall to make room for him. "So I come and sit here on Sundays and talk to them, and if you tell me that is foolish, I shall push you off this wall." Crispin sat down on the wall beside her, in his good coat. "Miss Fell," he said, "I have counted the 31 days. Here is my question, and I have written down the answer I want and put it in my pocket so that I shall not be tempted to argue you into it." He turned his hat over. "I have known you 11 weeks. In the first of them I found you eating bread at the corner of my own kitchen table by a candle end, and standing up straight, and refusing to tell me who had put you there, because you would not be the cause of trouble to a servant. In the 11th, I have found that I cannot get through an hour of business without wanting your opinion in it, and that I have begun timing my visits to the steward's room, and that when you laughed at the picture of my grandmother, I thought about it for 2 days. I am not offering you a home. You have £9,000, and there is no house in England that would not be improved by you, and you may buy your own. I am asking you to marry me, and I am asking it on my own account, because I am in love with you, and because I have spent 3 years abroad among strangers being nobody's particular business. And you are the first person since my mother died who has told me to my face that my chimneys want looking at." Susanna Fell sat on a churchyard wall with her hands in her lap. "Read me the answer in your pocket," she said. He took it out and unfolded it. It said in his own hand, "Yes, and you are not to make a speech about it at dinner." She laughed until she cried, and then she took the paper out of his fingers and folded it up small and put it away in her own pocket, and said, "You may keep half of that. I will have you make one more speech, and one only, and it will be at the wedding breakfast, and it will be about my father." He made it. 200 people heard the name of Thomas Fell of Ludcote spoken at the head of the Deverill table, and the story of the £9,000 given on no security to a man who did not deserve it. And every year afterwards, on the October anniversary, the Duke and Duchess of Deverill gave a dinner at the Chase for the tenants and the tradesmen and the servants, at which the Duke stood up and told it again, and the Duchess sat at his right hand and let him. The single folded sheet in the 7th Duke's slapdash hand was framed and hung, at Susanna's insistence, not in the library, but in the kitchen passage, above the corner of the scrubbed table nearest the scullery door, where a woman had eaten her dinner by a candle end for 14 months, and had never once complained of it to anybody.